Hi, and welcome to Serenity Now, a place for entrepreneurs to ask questions, learn, get connected, and be inspired. Join us as we talk about all things business and the search for the ever-elusive Serenity Now in both business and personal life. In today's episode, Serenity Now for Entrepreneurs unpacks funding for businesses and shares expertise that many listeners seek. Nina shares her perspective as a serial entrepreneur and what she did to finance her companies and what she now wishes was known from the start.
I thought, entrepreneurs, you're self-made, you use your own money, you save money, you do it yourself. That's what you're supposed to do. It never occurred to me to look for grants. I did not think that grants were a real thing.
So many businesses are starting out and need funding. Are grants available for startups? Hear what Peggy says about this.
When you start a business, you're probably going to have to do a bit of what Nina did and start with your own pocket change.
So how does this work?
If you've got a good base or foundation for your record keeping, and then you can plug in these gaps that you see in your projections through perhaps SRED as a grant, perhaps these hiring grants that Stephanie's talking about. And then there's also loans.
Interested in using grants for your business? How are they used and why are they important?
A sole proprietor, a small business, a large business, they could be leveraging these grants to hire people, to train their staff up, to expand into new markets.
I actually think, leveraging government grants is probably one of the greatest things that a business can do because, as you say, it goes straight to the bottom line.
Does this sound familiar to you serial entrepreneurs out there?
I just had an idea. I had no projections, Rita. There was no projections you're talking about. This was hey, we're going to try this. One company's making money. We're funding the other company for 6 months and we're going to see how it goes. That's it. That was the thought process.
What are the best practices from an accounting standpoint when you utilize non-dilutive funding?
Good records on an accounting standard is going to be my number one recommendation when it comes to any sort of grants and even loans.
Grants are one thing, but loans have a place in funding your business too. Listen to what Stephanie has to say about this.
I will say that in hindsight, I would absolutely, probably in the second or third year of my business, when I've got a comfort level that there's, repeat revenues and the client base is strong, I should have leveraged different loan programs.
Take a listen as Serenity Now for Entrepreneurs shows you the money.
Welcome to another episode of Serenity Now for Entrepreneurs. Today's episode is really interesting because it really draws on expertise from a large group of us here as the Serenity Sisters, where we speak on different types of financing programs that are available for businesses. So we're going to chat about grants, we're going to chat about tax credit, we're going to discuss loans, and we're also going to tie it together and talk a little bit about the accounting side of things and how you need to ensure that you're keeping your books in alignment, especially when you're dealing with government funds or bank funds and whatnot. So we thought the best way of doing this would be to chat with an entrepreneur who's also a Serenity Sister on how she had financed her business. So Nina, I'm going to just kind of bring you into the conversation from the start and ask you to introduce your businesses. Maybe you can choose one or two, up to you. And then let's chat a little bit about your process of funding your business and what you knew when you first started it. And then we can, discuss what are some of the options that would be available to you. So go ahead, Nina.
So I started my first business 23 years ago, and that was graphic design. So I went from a job to freelance to having my own boutique marketing agency. A few years later, I realized it's hard to scale that up because it's you on your own. And I saw an opportunity for something really unique when I was traveling. And it was airbrush tattoos and body painting. With my marketing background, I'm like, oh, that would really be cool to use airbrushing for logos. I can see this happening for branding, marketing. So the wheels started turning. It never occurred to me to look for grants. I did not think that grants were a real thing. And Stephanie is one of our Serenity sisters. And I learned about grants when I really met Stephanie. So not that long ago. But I thought, entrepreneurs, you're self-made, you use your own money, you save money, you do it yourself. That's what you're supposed to do. So when I came across this opportunity, I started doing my research, found out how much the equipment costs, started putting money away for it. I bootstrapped everything. I paid for everything myself. I didn't go to a bank. I used a really small amount on my credit card and then paid it off right away because, I don't want to have debt, right? Why would you want to have that? So I did the training. I'm self-trained. I didn't pay for the training because it was $800 US at the time. I'm like, I'm not paying that. I'm paying for this whole company myself. So also there was a risk attached to it. Like, it's airbrush tattoos in 2003. Nobody had ever even heard of it. So I didn't want to go get a big loan or go ask my parents for money. They thought the whole idea was insane. These are immigrant parents,
They did.
they're not
They
going to
really
support.
did.
They really
They
did.
really
And
did.
they're not going to support you running off from graphic design and marketing to go airbrush tattoo people. Like, that was insanity. So I spent $800 total on the first set of equipment, getting set up, and opening a kiosk location in Metrotown. We made $800 on the first day.
Wow.
So I had my return on investment in one day. It's unusual, but it was the timing of it. It was how it was set up. It was that people were like, what is this? What's going on? And this type of company is the type of company that if one person does it, it draws a buzz and everybody wants to try it. So I bootstrapped everything, every new location, every new piece of equipment, every hire, training. Now I look back and I'm like, there is grants for employees. There was
Yeah.
I had no idea. In my mind, I thought grants were for not-for-profits. They were for maybe students. And for some reason in my head, I kept thinking grants were for, agriculture or industries like that needed
Right.
help. I thought if you have an idea on your own and you're going to try it, you fund yourself,
Right.
And there is a little bit of that entrepreneur mentality where you pat yourself on the back because you're like, I did it by myself, but it is challenging to do it on your own. And if there's other options available, I love that if somebody can show you the money, like show me the money. Sure. If I was doing it over again, I would definitely be looking at those options. And I believe any startups should.
Right. Yeah, I mean, let's talk about and unpack a little bit on the grant side of things. I think this is actually part of the reason why I went into this business as well, because I'm fourth generation Chinese entrepreneur. None of my parents, none of my aunts and uncles, my grandparents never used government available funding. And when we talk about grants, we're really talking about non-dilutive funding, which means it doesn't cut into your share structure. The government doesn't take a portion of your company because they gave you some money, and it's not repayable. So if you're using it correctly and you're using it for what it was meant for, you do the reporting on it, then essentially it's kind of like, okay, take the money and go. So absolutely, when I started the business, my understanding was also that everything had to be really high tech. You had to have some like innovation to be able to access funding. It's for research and development. We'll chat about that in a few minutes, because Peggy will bring that into play as well. But the idea of using grants to me really resonated when I was like, wow, all of these companies, any company, a sole proprietor, a small business, a large business, they could be leveraging these grants to hire people, to train their staff up, to expand into new markets. So that's kind of where Granted was born, was just out of this desire to help a community that really didn't understand this. So I will say, Nina, you're not alone. It's not like, oh, do other people know this? And grants are really pie in the sky for people. And I think your assumption that grants are for students, that they're for nonprofits, charities, and agriculture, and unique different industries like that. I don't think that that's a wrong conception. It's just narrow in the way that there's so many grants that a lot of people don't know of. And so I think this is exactly what it is. Like a few things that I identified immediately from what you discussed is being able to hire people. What does that do? That gives you the ability to do things that you're really good at doing and then transfer the things that you don't love doing, like admin work, maybe bookkeeping, to somebody else who has the opportunity to learn. And so they can learn from you and increase kind of their employability skills. And for that, that's why the government would be offering funding that supports part of their wages. So sometimes these grants are called wage subsidies, right? Because it's subsidizing the wage. And it's not forever, it's not like, oh, you hire someone and they're on a wage subsidy for 10 years. It's you hire them and they might be on a wage subsidy for 3 months or 6 months until they've learned the skills. And then, of course, Nina, you spoke of training. The opportunity there absolutely is training yourself, maybe training your staff. And in the past, it was if you are the business owner, you're not going to be able to get as much in training funds because they see that as an operational thing, right? But if you're training staff up, how much faster could your business be going if you were able to train someone up to be another technician or to train someone to do social media or to train someone to, do your sales for you. And so opportunities like that are available. And then as you expand, and I know you do events as well, being able to take your products and your services into another country. And so remember, the Canadian government's not going to necessarily want to have competing companies within Canada and funding them to compete with each other. So the idea is to be able to look at opportunities outside of Canada and to be able to capture market share internationally. So those are kind of just a few types of grants. And of course, it goes beyond that now with a lot of clean tech and a lot of initiatives in that area. There are some niche type of programs as well. But one area that I don't have very much expertise in is really in like the tax credits and that research and development side. So I'm actually going to draw on Peggy's expertise on this because Peggy, SRED and the SRED tax credit system was told to me, my parents told me, my mom told me, she worked at CRA for 30 years. Like, why are you doing grants? You should do SRED. That's way more lucrative. And I never went into it. I didn't have this interest. So I'm fascinated by how you grew your business and tips that you can share with the listeners today on what are some of the best practice when you're looking at either the Canadian SRED program or other tax credits that support innovation in other countries.
Right. Thanks, Steph. Yeah, I started my business 30 plus years ago. And when I started, Nita, it's kind of funny. You're saying you didn't think the grants were for people. Well, people didn't believe that SRED was accessible. We had to sell them on the fact that there was government funding out there. 30 plus years later, everybody understands that the scientific research and experimental development tax credits are out there, and they're generous and they're unlimited, and if you qualify, you get them. And that's really different from some of the grant programs that are discretionary, where they can get a budget and the grant fund decides who gets the money. Whereas SRED, the wonderful thing about it is that if your project meets the eligibility, there is no cap on how much the government will spend supporting those projects. So you are able to claim if your project is eligible. Now, the science side of it is that you have to be not necessarily doing groundbreaking work in the world at large, but you have to be doing something that pushes your own knowledge a little bit. It can be incrementally or it can be a big improvement. And for that, the government will give you a portion of that funding back. It's a great program. It's been around since the mid-'80s, and most companies, as I say, are quite familiar with it. Accessing it is like most grants. It's a little bit of a niche. It's something that you need to have some documentation for, and you need to be prepared when you make a claim, and you need to have a good advisor to help you understand what parts of the work that you did were SRED, and make your application really accurate when it goes in the beginning. The worst thing you want to do is start an uphill climb with the CRA. Once you file an application that's a bit off. And I do know that you mentioned other countries and whatnot. There's a lot of similar programs in England and the United States for tax credits for innovation. And in Canada, there's also other programs. And Nina, you mentioned the agriculture industry. There is a whole bank of granting programs in that industry, and one of them is the Agri-Innovate. And there's a good amount of, some of them are interest-free loans, and other ones are actual grant amounts. But it's definitely worth looking into, and it's something that it's a bit daunting. I've tried to look into other grants that I don't have an expertise in myself. And when I first look at the requirements and trying to understand the ins and outs of it, it is rather daunting. But, I'm very comfortable with being able to assess what's SRED and what's not. And I'm sure Stephanie can tell you very quickly what grant would be worth going after for your company, or a combination of grants. And that's the benefit of us working in it every single day. So, I do say that, go after grants, but get some good help, because it just streamlines the process and makes it accessible. Otherwise, they can seem rather daunting, and there's nothing worse than putting in an application and having to, defend it and do an uphill climb. So, and that just sort of leads me to that whole side of, the documentation side, Candice. I mean, when we talk about these grants, there's all kinds of requirements on the not only just the technical documentation, but being prepared for a grant, having the right bookkeeping, having the right financials. Maybe you could just touch on that a bit for us.
For sure. So for all of these programs, and for accounting and taxation in general, actually, the cornerstone is always going to be good records. And everybody thinks they're wonderful, the records are wonderful, but honestly, if you're going to be applying for grants and know what your financial situation is you need an actual proper accounting system. Likely the free one that you get online is probably not going to suffice. Might need to invest a little bit of money into it. But they're not expensive. And some of the cloud-based options are like really user-friendly. You don't have to be an accountant to be able to use them these days. If they're set up properly, you get, the right help right up front. 80-90% of your accounting work is done pretty seamlessly, and and you don't really need a lot of knowledge to keep it going. You're going to need some help once in a while, but just having the right system in place allows you to pull the reports that you need to apply for the grants, and then also pull the reports that you need to pull to keep the grants, because some of these grants have post-reporting requirements in order to keep or to get the money. So good records on an accounting standard is going to be my number one recommendation when it comes to any sort of grants and even loans, right, Rita?
Absolutely, Candice. I think tying it all together, grants are a piece of the puzzle for helping you to grow and build your business. Nina, I'm 100% with you, and originally fearful of taking on any debt, and that grants was just so nuanced. So forget it. I'm just not going to look at it. Much easier. I respond and report to myself way better, and that's why I'm an entrepreneur, right? So, but if you take the approach of looking at your company holistically, and you set your foundation and you build your growth plan and your strategy with your team of advisors, and I'm just going to put in a plug. If you have the Serenity sisters with you, you're going to be fine.
There you go.
But all joking to the side, you will have your own team of advisors that you've built up as you continue to build and grow your business. And when you look at the business, it's not just one piece. You can't just look at one area. So as you're growing and building projections, you're going to see shortfalls. So in this month, I will need to hire someone, or I will not be able to get the revenues. Or in this month, I'll have a working capital shortfall because I need to be able to cover the additional expense of hiring someone the month before, because they're not going to be revenue producing. They're not going to produce their wage for at least another, well, it'd be nice in 6 months, but perhaps not a year, like until they get through it all, depending on their level and their expertise. So you take a look at what's actually happening in your growth plan through this thing called projections. And those are set up well if you've got a good base or foundation for your record keeping, as Candice said. And then you can plug in these gaps that you see in your projections through perhaps SRED as a grant, perhaps these hiring grants that Stephanie's talking about. And then there's also loans. And I'm with you. Taking on debt, that's scary, but debt can actually be good debt or bad debt. And so I understand sometimes people can't see that difference between the two, but debt can leverage and propel your business forward way faster than you could ever do on your own. And so the debt has to actually match, what are you actually doing? So I call it short term, medium term, and long term. In the short term, you might have a working capital crunch. So you match your short term crunch with like an operating line. And that helps you because, as we all know, in the last couple of years, some clients took a little longer to pay. So we gave them that room to pay us back by us using an operating line to help finance that piece of the puzzle. Now, sometimes you're going to have to buy equipment, and sometimes it's kind of, a good, healthy, big piece of equipment, and we can say agriculture, or we can say maybe, Nina, your compressors, or maybe we can talk about some very large equipment that we need for a manufacturing company. That's like a medium term, piece of, or a medium term asset. So instead of taking it all out of your operating line and financing that, piece of equipment because it was easily accessible and the bank didn't ask you any questions, but the next month you'll be short on wages maybe. So that's not a great way to use that short term. That revolving line of credit should go up and down. So instead you match it up with a longer term loan. So you get a loan for that asset. So they base it on the life value of the asset, the sellability of it. And that helps you then not dip into your operating line and you continue to build, because that asset, that piece of equipment maybe shaves time, maybe helps you build production faster, but you have to understand, what does that do for your business? So run the numbers. And then finally, you go into something like a very long-term asset. That could be a building or a vehicle. So it costs a lot more. And that's where you pick up a mortgage, for example. And that's where you use a loan for that. And all of these pieces are good debt because you've actually sat down to work through your growth strategy, through your projections, saw your shortfall, and explained that, and then picked up these good debts to allow you to leverage and grow your business that much faster. But you've also grabbed some of these grants, which are awesome now that we have Stephanie here, now that we've got Peggy to work on the research side of things. And, I think sometimes people feel like they need to learn it all. And my whole piece for everything and Partners for Growth and what we're all about, don't learn it all. Just do what you're good at. Because if you try to do it all, then, for example, the books will sit on the side of the desk. It'll sit there and then you get stressed and then you look at it and then you have fear and then you have paralysis and forget it. It's done, So hand that off to somebody like Candace. If you have an idea that could be what we call shreddable, pick up the phone and call Peggy. She'll be able to answer those questions pretty quickly and or maybe help you devise a different strategy to allow you to be able to use that. And then when it comes to the other pieces or grant side of things, give Stephanie a call. I don't think she's going to say, no, I'm not here to answer your calls. Okay. So,
Right.
These are advisors and resources that you get to use that perhaps at the very beginning of the stage or setup of the company, you didn't know. And besides, you were too busy trying to figure out how to set up a company. So how do you figure all these pieces out? So you get to know these nuances and advisors through referrals, through making mistakes and then building your business. But take a holistic approach. That's what we do. So we'll pull in Stephanie, we'll pull in Peggy, we'll pull in Candace as part of the team or great partners that we get to work with for our clients. So hopefully that helps a little bit on the loan side. I mean, how do you get it? That's a whole different It's a whole
That's
different
another
topic.
That's another episode.
Yeah.
Another episode.
You know what? You brought up something, Rita, that I think we should mention. I think Stephanie, I get a lot of people coming to us and thinking that certain things are fundable through grants, and one of them is machinery. And the other one is the startup of a business. And the reality is, you know, at one time, pre-2014, there was a bit of a tax credit on equipment, but it wasn't that generous. But certainly when it comes to purchasing equipment, I think you need to take the view that Rita has taken. There is generally not government funding for that, as well as when you start a business, you're probably going to have to do a bit of what Nita did and start with your own pocket change.
I'll add to this. You know, what's fascinating for me is I'm a cash only girl. I've always taught like you don't go and take debt on unless you can pay it all off. And so what's the point in doing like a $5,000 loan or a line? You know, what's the point in doing that when you're first starting your business? I will say that in hindsight, I would absolutely probably in the second or third year of my business when I've got a comfort level that there's, you know, repeat revenues and the client base is strong. I should have leveraged different loan programs because it really exactly what you were saying, Rita, like it does move your business so much faster. If I was able to triple my team or bring in the right technology and not try to do it in a quote unquote, air quotes, lean manner, where you're just piecing things together or using like what Candace said, like free technology, and it only takes you up to this number of transactions, and then you got to figure out what you're going to do after that. So it just gives you, as an entrepreneur, a little bit of breathing space. And I think that everybody has a different comfort level with things that are repayable. So obviously loans are repayable. But as women entrepreneurs, there are so many different options that we have that can help us a little bit further and give us a little bit more leverage. And you're not then having to put your house as collateral or, you know, a bunch of other things that are your personal assets. So Nina, I think that's kind of what I learned in doing the business. And now I find that I am a little bit more adventurous in telling people, look at all of these different ways. You know, there's the bank of mom and dad, I say, and there's venture capitalists, and there's, you know, and loans and tax credits and grants and savings. And so do it in a way that you're really comfortable with and speak to the professionals to ensure that you're not over leveraging.
Let's talk about that a bit, Steph.
Yeah.
Actually, I think that's a really good point. You mentioned bad debt. What do we mean when we say bad debt, good debt? I hear what good debt is. I experienced good debt where you use the bank's money to purchase something and it grows. You still only owe.
I've seen some bad debt. I've seen some companies go awry, more in my marketing company, like where somebody's come up with an idea. This is what I'm going to try. And like I did with Tattoos for Now way back then, I just had an idea. I had no projections, Rita. Like there was no projections you're talking about. This was like, hey, we're going to try this. One company's making money. We're funding the other company for 6 months and we're going to see how it goes. That's it. That was the thought process.
Well, that's a plan.
That's a plan. It's some sort of a plan. But what I've seen other companies, what they do is they go hire the best marketing firm for their idea that they don't even know is viable. And now you spent $20,000 on a website. And I would say that is not the best idea. Like test your idea first, see if it's viable, and then go and spend money. And I feel like that if you're incurring debt for those kinds of, especially marketing expenditures, when your idea is not tested and proven to be viable and there's a target market, not the one that's in your head, but people are actually buying stuff from you, like whatever it is you're selling, then like hold off. As for the bank of mom and dad, the problem with mom and dad is if you happen to have a mom and dad like mine that are incredibly vocal, they're going to want some sort of say so in your business, which you might not want. So proceed with caution there. They're going to tell you, you know what you should do? Hey, I gave you this money, so let me tell you what I think, right? So there's some things there. That could be also bad debt, Peggy.
Yeah, especially if you lose it, Nina.
Yes. And then you got to go to Thanksgiving dinner with your parents while they're staring at you across the table.
I'm going to share a little bit. That's such a good point. Sometimes we throw around these terms, Peggy, and we're like, you should know what this is, and really we got to take a step back. Some of the things that I can call bad debt, is akin to what you were talking about, Nina, is you're leveraging your credit card. But if you're not paying that back within the allotted time, then your rates of interest could potentially just be too high. And you're actually not realizing you're financing your business with a credit card, but you're not calculating that interest rate into your costs. And you're actually not going to be making any money off of your product or good or service because you're paying too much interest. So being cautious about that, but you can also call a credit card good debt, because if you use it and use it right to that last day and then pay within that 30-day, you're like, I just got 30-day terms. That is sweet. So the other thing is with your customers, you can use them as a source of financing. So some people say, well, how do you do that? Well, you collect your receivables on time and you stay on top of it. Well, another way is you can say, I discount what I charged you by 10% if you pay me faster. Does it help you? But just run the numbers, do the math. The other source could be your suppliers. You can go to your suppliers and say, can I have 30-day terms? And they're going to say, you're a startup. You're going to get nothing. Not only that, it's cash on demand now.
Yes.
But then you kind of build that relationship. And what I always say is, you don't know until you ask. So you keep asking after 30 days, after 60 days, after that. Eventually they're going to say, well, this person has paid us. Maybe we'll give them 10 days. And you're going to say, yes, I got 10 days. And then you build that out to 30 or 60-day terms. Another form of bad debt, though, and please be really careful about this, because I've seen it too often, is customers come over to me and say, I just signed on at 26 locations of a retail store. And I freak out immediately. Or I just got this big launch with Costco. I'm not saying anything bad against Costco. Please don't take any offense. We go there. we support Costco. But what I'm saying is that, have you looked at the fine print on the terms of payment? So this customer is big. This customer basically has the power. You have no power. So when one person came over to me and said, I got 26 locations, and they were so excited, they're like, can you now, let's go to the bank and let's get this funding. And I said, no, I'm almost too scared to ask. What are your terms? And he was like, what do you mean? I'm like, send me the documents, just let me start reading them, because I'm scared crapless right now. And the terms were 180 days, not from the day you started. It was the date of arrival of the goods. So if this person is, they were in food manufacturing. So you hire the staff, you buy the ingredients, you whip up your recipe, you put it together, get it on a truck, and get it to 26 locations. Now think about that cost, that output. And now I have to wait 6 months to get paid on that first one. Is that good? So being very careful. So bad debt can come in many different forms. And one of the ones I really like to stress on or try to help people see is be careful of those large orders. Be really careful of the large companies. It's exciting to say, hey, I'm with them, but you've got to be ready for that. And that's where a good person like Candace and myself will come along and go, hold tight. And,
right.
We might actually say no. I've said no to some of these places until a company was ready, and built enough in their background and their operating line to sustain something like that. So good question.
Yeah.
I've seen failures because of that.
For sure. I think
with innovative products that, all of a sudden this guy that invented it in his, back shop, all of a sudden is buying $900,000 worth of inventory because he has to supply Home Hardware or Home Depot or whomever, and hugely fails. But I see his product in there all the time.
I have a I have a love-hate relationship with inventory. I hate inventory because I don't want to hold it. Because if you hold it, you're actually financing it. The faster you turn it, that's where you make money.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last 2 years, what's been happening? How long does it take for stuff to arrive?
Yeah.
So now you can't do this just-in-time inventory anymore.
That
right?
sounds like
So-
a whole new episode.
Yeah.
Lita.
We're gonna wrap this one up, but I love the quick fire. Just if there's any last thoughts or if there's something that you'd learn on here. So I'm gonna start first, and I will just say there's something that I'd forgotten to mention, which is when you leverage grants or tax credits, remember that it is you're investing in this, and then it's a reimbursement process sometimes from the government. So don't assume that the money comes as soon as you sign off on a contract. That often does not happen. And it's because the government, they're stewards of taxpayer dollars. So they need to make sure that they're not just dropping $50,000 into a company's bank account and then not able to get what was originally promised, because there's another, fire that entrepreneur needs to put out first with that money. So just keep that in mind. You need to have a little bit of cash flow there. Nina, what are your kind of thoughts on today's episode, and what did you learn?
Listening to all this and wrapping up, where I started and where I am today, we just have to keep in mind that this was 19 years ago. So there wasn't the internet and there wasn't all this knowledge available, but now we have that, right? Well, there was the internet. It was just limited. So, it's great to have these options available. You can research. We have YouTube now. Like we can talk to advisors. There's companies out there, which is great. I would just say that, I like to build a business with proceeding with caution. Like I like to take it one step at a time, and a service company is really different than a product company. So I was able to bootstrap it. So I would say for those product companies and that still be cautious, right? And just talking about those big orders and Costco and such, I would say sales just always needs to talk to accounting. So that's my final thought on that. The sales guys needs to talk to the accounting guy, and they should be nice to marketing as well.
Love it. Peggy, what are your kind of parting thoughts on this episode?
I actually think, leveraging government grants is probably one of the greatest things that a business can do, because, as you say, it goes straight to the bottom line. And I always tell my clients, especially if they're involved in innovation and doing new products, that the SRED grant is and should be treated like your best customer, because there's very few customers that you will dump. Say on average, I see $60,000 per client. I would say that's been a pretty consistent average for a lot of years. So $60,000 grant onto your bottom line. I don't know many customers that you'll get that much profit from. So
Rita,
parting thoughts.
I was going to say on the profit note, I'm just going to jump in here and just remind people that when you're getting these grants, they are usually going to be taxed by the government. So
True.
you don't have to repay them. You don't have
Yeah.
to repay them, but you do have to pay tax on them. And I can tell you, a lot of startups, they have a really profitable first year, and they're all excited about the money they're making, and they use that money to leverage the business further, and they forget about the taxes.
Right.
And then that becomes a bad debt, because now the tax time comes due, and they have a huge tax bill that they can't pay. So don't forget to put that into your planning, because they're not very forgiving, those folks over there at CRA. So
Yeah, that's a great point, Candace. Thanks for chiming in on that. Rita, I'll let you close this one out.
Yeah, no, I'm with everyone. I'm with Nina. Proceed with caution. What I always love to say is build that foundation, understand your numbers. You can get definitely grants from many different places, and I really love the idea of being able to utilize them when they actually fit your needs and at the time you need it. And sometimes they don't. And use that as part of your holistic finance approach to your growth strategy for your business, along with loans that match, the terms of the assets. So I love talking about numbers and finance and everything, but proceed with caution.
Yeah.
Take some time to walk through this process. And yeah, absolutely. You got to talk to a Candace on this stuff.
Everyone talk to Candace.
Yeah.
Everyone.
There you go.
Everybody should have a good accountant in their portfolio of advisors for sure.
Agreed.
100%.
Agreed. Well, this was such an enlightening episode. It's a little bit longer, but I think that the topic is really relevant to new startups that are happening and having expectations of free money out there, as well as those who are pivoting and growing and doing things a little bit differently. So just some options in terms of financing available. So please share this episode with anyone you feel could benefit from it. And I know that I always continue to learn from these ladies as well. You never know when by sharing this episode, you are able to give an entrepreneur that you know some serenity now. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed this episode and picked up some good tips and best practices that would benefit your entrepreneurial journey. Remember, none of the content in this podcast should be relied upon as standard legal or business advice. Always consult a professional for your specific business. You may know someone who could benefit from this podcast. Please share it with your business community, and perhaps it can give an entrepreneur you know some serenity now.